Hey there, CPO here, and today I wanted to kind of give you the officially unofficial rundown on the different Taro fly barless heads that are out there. So there's obviously been a couple different variations of the standard fly barless head that have been arriving in kits as far as different feathering shafts and those assemblies, as well as there's been an upgraded fly barless head that has been released by Taro. And then there are two different versions of a DFC head released by Taro. So what I wanted to do was just kind of take a minute to go through the different types of heads, how they differ from one another, what order they came out in. Everybody wants to know which is the most recent, and all that. So I've got the rundown. Thanks to Dave at Taro RC Heli for hooking me up with some heads so that I could demonstrate for you the differences. And then I'll also go through each individual head and show you the installation order of the internal parts, because it's going to vary from head to head. So just a quick look at what we have here. This is my my head that came off my kit. I pulled it off the heli, which is why you see all the links and everything all together on it. This is the actual head that I've been running on my 450. This is the one that most everybody's getting with their kits, with the exception of some of you are getting a different feathering shaft setup. So I'm going to go through the differences between the feathering shaft that I have in here versus the one that you may see as an upgraded feathering shaft. This is the upgraded version. We'll call this a Generation 2 fly barless head, and basically it's a little beefier design. Supposed to have a stronger head block, and it's got a little different new look, more square look as opposed to the original look. And these are it comes with the links and everything, the turnbuckle links that you would need for that. Then we have the first generation DFC head, which is this one here. It's just basically a standard DFC. That's the first generation that came out from Taro. And then they came out with a second generation, which is the split lock version. As you can see here, it's actually got the split lock. Now, both of the standard fly barless heads were split lock to begin with. Then the standard DFC did not have a split lock design. And then when they came out with the split lock, they basically went back to the split lock design. So I'll talk about these a little bit more in detail individually. And this second generation split lock head block is actually more akin to more like a Goblin style DFC head. So interesting there. These DFCs do come with their own main shafts, and the reason is because the main shaft is shorter on the DFCs than with the standard fly barless head. So here's a standard main shaft off my heli, and you can see the DFCs are quite a bit shorter, which one of the benefits of the DFC is that it lowers the head closer to the heli, and it's supposed to be a little bit more in tune, direct, direct flight control is what DFC stands for, and it's supposed to be a little bit more direct feel, more positive control. And another upside is the fewer parts. They're much simpler design. You get rid of this follower style design here with these swash followers and the links, and you go straight to a link design, single control link, and it's fewer parts. It looks cooler, to be honest with you. I think it looks really cool. But the problem is there's seems to be a lot more reported damage upon crashing, because all of that energy now isn't taken up in all these little parts. It's actually pushed down generally to the servo arms and the servos, which people have reported a lot more servo damage during crashes with the DFC style head than the regular fly barless head. Anyway, that's the 4 different options. Really, you've got 4.5 because you've got this upgraded feathering shaft set up with basically the parts are going to go in a different order. The thrust bearings are going to go in a different order than they do in the standard feathering shaft setup. So I'll go through the standard setup with you, as well as show you the upgraded, because I know people are getting kits, like I said, with this upgraded setup. And if you buy a new feathering shaft setup, you may end up with one of these newer styles. So you've got two different versions of the standard fly barless head with two different versions of the feathering shaft, the one that's in there and then this one. And then you've got two different versions of the DFC, the direct flight control style heads. So that's that, and what I'll do is I'll break these out individually and kind of show you how they go together. So one thing I did want to do is take a minute to look at the different weights of the heads in their assemblies, for those of you who pay a lot of attention to every gram that goes onto your helicopter. So this is the standard fly barless Gen 1. And basically, I'm going to include everything that's necessary for it to run. So let's change our units here. So we'll go grams, 41 grams roughly for that. And that includes the top button and the links as well. So that's pretty much how it's coming. The Gen 2 version, don't worry, I got to throw in these links too, because they count for the weight. Gen 2 version looks to be a little bit lighter at 40 grams. 41 now it bounced to, so we're talking 1 to 2 grams tops difference there in weight. This is the DFC Generation 1. It weighs in at 43. $42. And then the DFC Generation 2 looks to be about 43. So they're really close in weight. Like I said, not more than 1 or 2 grams difference between them. I will note that there is a smaller main shaft associated with the DFC head, so you may see some weight savings there. So this DFC main shaft looks to be 16 grams, and the standard fly barless main shaft looks to be 17 grams. So we're talking maybe a gram difference there. So in the end, not a whole lot of difference. All right, so first let's take a look at the standard fly barless heads. Again, Gen 1, Gen 2. Both of these come with the head buttons on them. I will note that the DFC heads, neither of them come with a head button. They're drilled, they have the hole for them, but no head button. So both of these come with the head button, and both of them come in the package with the links that you need to connect to the swash, as well as the little turnbuckle tool, which is basically, looks like a little tiny Allen wrench used to help turn the turnbuckles. So I'm going to go through basically the assembly, disassembly, and reassembly of one of these, because they're essentially the same, other than the look, right? So I'd rather not take apart my current head, which is this guy here. This is the one I'm actively flying, so I'm gonna leave it together because it's all nice and Loctited and lubed, and I'm gonna focus on this guy here since it's still in brand new shape. But basically, the fundamental difference between the two is, like I said, the updated block style. It's supposed to be a little bit heavier duty. One thing they did do differently with the Gen 2 is they put in a little capture system for this Jesus nut here. As you can see on the original, it's got a similar kind of a not quite as robust split lock design. I don't know if you can see that there. It is split, and tightening up these followers does collapse that down around the main shaft. And then this Jesus bolt goes through, and there's a nut there, but there's no capture system. You have to have a pair of pliers or something to hold that as you tighten it down. On this newer style, they actually have it captured down inside a little recess, which makes it a lot easier for disassembly. And as you can see, once you get it to that point where it's captured inside there, you can continue to tighten it down without having to hold it, which is really cool. So just like the first gen head, this kind of follower assembly is already pre-set up from the factory, comes together, so I wouldn't worry about that. The only thing I would focus on would be removing these screws here for the followers, and then don't forget you have a little washer here. You don't want to lose track of that. So the other really cool thing is the first gen assembly is kind of sort of, like I said, a split lock design, but it's really the tightening down of these followers that tightens up this split. So not a true split lock design in the way that this one is, with the fact that you've got a separate screw set up here to tighten down this split. So you've got extra mechanics here, which means the positive thing there is that you can have the split around the main shaft. You can have this locked down really tight with these screws, but you may not want these really tight because they may bind. So think of it like that. So when you do put these back together, make sure you pull out these screws here that hold the split lock design together. Make sure you pull those out, thread lock them, and then when you tighten them down finally around the shaft, they'll be good and snug. So I'm going to put them back in there so I don't lose them. But basically you've got two, one on each side. Then for these followers, you want to screw into the raised piece here. I would recommend, my recommendation would be to take some thread locker and put it on a toothpick and put it down inside those threads. That way you're not coming close to getting thread locker in these bearings. And then just once you have it down in the threads, do just like that to get it on this follower arm. So remember, you want the follower to cross over in front of the head upon installation. So you want to read the Taro brand when it's installed correctly. You want it to be not like that, but like this. And then we flip it over. And same thing, not forgetting the fact that I have a little washer there. Thread lock. And then that would all go back together just like that. So that's basically the bottom of the assembly. The head button is obviously just as it is. It's a simple head button with a small screw, just like on the other one. So you would just, when you're finally done with all of your setup and ready to go, put a little thread locker on there and tighten that down, and that'll be good to go. So now what we need to do is take a look at the feathering shaft setup, the bearing setup, and the grips, and I'll make sure that you understand how those go together. Alright, so the first thing we need to do here is take off these grip bolts here. Alright, and then using the 1.5 millimeter driver, you may find yourself in a situation where you need two drivers to loosen or tighten these, in which case, feel free to go get another one and put one on one side. Turn it like that. When they're pretty loose though, it's generally not that big of a deal. If you pull out and put some outward pressure on it as you're unscrewing, it'll generally hold it. But so I'm going to take this apart for you, show you what we got. This is a standard first gen feathering shaft. I hate to use first gen, second gen. This is a second gen fly barless head, but it's got the original style feathering shaft. I'm just trying to get that bearing out of there. There we go. All right. Let me take... So, tell you a little bit about what I'm doing here. Basically, you have you have two radial bearings, one on the outside, one on the inside. You have this little spacer that goes between the grip and the head block. You have this little shim that goes between the radial bearing and the thrust bearing assembly. And then this is your three-part thrust bearing assembly. And then you have a washer, and then you have your screw to hold it all together. And then once you pull this out, you do have these little rubber dampers for the feathering shaft. They're pretty easy to pop out. I usually pop them out from the opposite direction. Just push those through. And then this is the completely disassembled head block. And this is a completely disassembled grip. And then of course this also actually comes off. In reality, the only thing you really need to do this is take it apart, put some thread lock on it, and then screw it back together. So that's that. I think I'll leave this other side together because my real purpose is to show you how this thing goes, and I can do this with one side and just know that it's going to be exactly the same on the opposite side. So with that said, the order is pretty much as I have it here. Damper, spacer, radial bearing number 1, then your grip is going to go in, right? Radial bearing number 2, spacer, and then you have your sandwich that is your thrust bearing. And remember, you might have seen my last video on the tail assembly, but the thrust bearing goes with the larger inner diameter hole towards the inside, towards the head block. Then your bearing assembly with the cup facing the inside towards the head block, and then the smaller inner diameter facing, you know, obviously sandwiching in on the outside. And that's how that's going to go. In this particular style, this is the original style feathering shaft, and it's the one with the step on it, right? So it's not completely smooth. This is the order that the assembly goes. The thrust bearing is on the outside of the two radial bearings. So that's going to change when we look at this other style feathering shaft that isn't stepped. It's the same diameter all the way across. So you really need to make sure you understand which feathering shaft you have to make sure you know which order these are going to go together in. I'm going to take the damper, push it through. Generally, you would put some lubricant in this to help this process along. I am not lubricating right now because I'm not planning on actually installing this. Okay, and then you got the other damper here, And make sure that you press this damper in back inside here as well as you can. You don't want it all hanging out, but it fits in there really nicely. Then the next thing you're going to have is your spacer. You're going to take your radial bearing, put one of them on the outside, and then another one, the other one, on the inside. I just use the driver to kind of work it down in there. And you're going to want it to fit around that shaft, so you may have to kind of coax it a little bit. And when you get it right, you'll see a little bit of that shaft sticking up inside there. So that radial bearing is down there all the way. Now let's take a look real quick at these control arms, because you want to make sure that you put them on the right way. This 450 helicopter is a leading edge control, and what that means is the leading edge of the blade, which here's a blade here, which is the fat edge, the straight edge, this one here, not the curved edge. That's the side that gets pulled around by the swash, to be exact. But that's the control that happens. So you want to make sure that you set it up correctly so that when you put your blades on, they'll be right. And basically the easy way to look at this is, as you're looking at the head, the right side should have a control arm on the front. So as I'm holding the head, this is the right, the control arm is on the front. If I flip it over, it's still, the right side has a control arm in the front. So if you have something different, if you have something like this, then you've got it wrong. See, the left side has the control arm in the front, and that would be backwards. Now, once we have this thing put together, they're not going to be so easy to flip. I've got a little bit, because I haven't screwed it down yet, I can pull it apart and swap them. But once you get it tightened down, the only way to fix it is going to be to probably take these arms off or take your grips off, which I would just take the arms off at that point. But just make sure when you put it all together that that the right side has the control arm facing forward. So that's that. So we have our radio bearings inside of there. Now, one thing I've seen recommended, and this is probably a good point to talk about it, is rather than putting thread lock on your bolt and trying to run it through all of these bearings and risk getting thread locker in everything, before you get to this stage, I've seen people who recommend going ahead and putting some thread lock into this at this point. So either put some thread lock on your screw and then run it through to get some thread lock through there, and then pull it back out again. Or take a toothpick and put some thread lock inside there. Point being is that it's easier to get access to thread lock this now than it will be once the grip is on, and then you don't have the issue of getting thread lock all over everything when you try and scoot that screw through. So anyway, that might be something to think about. All right, so got my bearing in there. I'm going to take this shim. It's going to go in next, the brass shim. And then now I'm going to work on putting these thrust bearings in here. So remember, thrust bearings, always the larger inner diameter hole will go in closest to the head block, because that's the rotation point. Unfortunately, the Taro branded thrust bearings don't have the in-out designation, so you can't just read them like you can on some of the other models. But it's pretty easy to tell which one's got a bigger diameter hole, and it's actually easier if you flip them upside down. For me, it's a little bit tougher to tell this way, but it's really easy if you flip them over to see. And of course, if you're in doubt, measure. But this one is the larger inner diameter hole, so it's going to go in first, and then the smaller one is going to go after the bearing. So it's going to go just like that. So what I like to do is I'll take it in the opposite order. So this is the smaller one. It's going to go on the outside. Then what I would do is take and lubricate these bearings with some grease. I use a multi-purpose grease, and then I put them in so that the cup faces in. So this is going to go inside the grip this way. So you want that cup facing in to kind of retain that grease from centrifugal force. And then the larger inner diameter race will go in like that. So you have this bearing sandwich here, right, with your races facing in and the smooth sides on the outside. And then once you get it like that, I'll generally just use this as a guide to slip that down through there, just like that. Okay, and that'll fit down in there nice and easy. Then you take your screw with your washer, and I generally stick it on the end of my driver. Oops. And again, if you've already thread locked your feathering shaft hole there, then you don't need to worry about anything at this point. Otherwise, you need to make sure you get some thread lock onto that screw. And then you'll just tighten that down. Eventually, you'll hit a point where the other side's going to turn, and you're going to need some help from another driver to get it tightened down. And when that happens, you just grab another driver and snug it down. So this is a completely reassembled head. Again, you can see I can't swap these now, so I need to make sure I have them right, which is the right side has the follower in the front, and that's how it's supposed to be. Everything should be nice and smooth. You shouldn't feel any grinding or binding. And then of course I've got my grip bolts here. And that is that. So when you put this on, you'd pull out your Jesus bolt and then slip it over the shaft. Of course, I'd slip it all the way up because the Jesus bolt is there. You thread your Jesus bolt through the hole, and then you tighten down these split lock screws right here, and that'll clamp this around the shaft. And what I would recommend doing is tighten them a little bit at a time, so you get even pressure. So don't crank on one all the way till it's tight. Just tighten a few turns here and there, and then as you go, it'll start to snug up, and already it's snug. I haven't even run it up to the Jesus bolt. So that's the recommendation for that. And I think that clears it up. The next thing I'll do is show you the alternative feathering shaft, and then how that assembly would go together, and how that's different than this assembly we just looked at. All right, so this has got the new style feathering shaft in here now. Basically, all I did was take out the old feathering shaft, the stepped version, the original style, slid in the non-stepped version. Now you're going to be reusing your bushings from the former, and then also I'm reusing the little spacers that go between the blade grip and the block, because the feathering shaft itself did not come with those. Now your kit may come with these, but they may be different. They may be brass, they may be a little bit more cone shaped or what have you, but that's going to be the spacer that goes here. But everything else should be the same from kit to kit. So basically what you have is you have your spacer, and then You're going to put a radial bearing inside the grip just like normal. But this time, instead of putting another radial bearing in, now the actual thrust bearing goes in next. So looking at your inner and outer diameter, same as always. The larger inner diameter goes in to the inside of the grip. Just going to basically slip that down in there. Okay. So now that you have your thrust bearing in there, the next thing you have is this little spacer, this brass spacer. And it's going to fit in there quite loose. And then your radial bearing will go in next. I'm just lining everything up with the driver. Once you have that, then you have your screw with the washer. And everything should press in nicely. There we go. And once you get it tight, it'll look exactly the same, basically from the outside. From the inside, it's going to look fundamentally the same. Make sure this is all the way down inside that grip. If it's sticking out, you don't have it in all the way. But that's basically the order of assembly for this. So taking another recap on this other side, you would have your spacer, whatever spacer that is. It's going to be a little small piece, skinnier than this this brass piece that I have for the actual feathering shaft, but you should have some sort of a little spacer here that will go on. Then you're going to have the radial bearing. Then you're going to have the grip will fit on next. Then your thrust bearing assembly. Like that. Then this spacer. Then the other radial bearing. And then the washer and screw assembly. Oops. And of course your blade grip is going to fit in between there like that. So let me get a nice close up here. So that's how that assembly is going to look. Keeping in mind your blade grip is going to fit right here between the thrust bearing and the inside radial bearing. So again, the fundamental difference is you've got radial bearings on the outside with the thrust bearing in the middle. And for this to work, you need to have the feathering shaft that isn't stepped. It's the same diameter all the way through, not stepped like this, but the same diameter all the way through for all these parts. Okay. And then what keeps the screw head from pushing down on all this is this washer and screws right in into there. So at any rate, that's the new style feathering shaft, and hopefully that makes sense for you all. And that's what it looks like installed. Cool. All right, so let's take a look at these DFC heads. They're fundamentally the same, so I'll talk about them together, kind of like I did the standard fly barless heads. Remember, these both come with button screw holes, but no head button. I guess the assumption is you'll use your existing head button from whatever you're replacing. One thing I do like about these, the blade grips seem quite a bit more substantial. I really like them. I like the clean lines. One thing they did do with the DFCs is put the zero pitch markings on there. On both of these, they have two different types, but let me show you these. So as you can see here, there's an alignment mark to help you adjust for center pitch by sight. And then same thing, this one's got a little bit different style. It's got the single line through the head block, and then the line that would match it up on the grip. So that's kind of cool. I have seen a couple of different variations of these markings on different grips, even assembled components that have two different types of marking on the same head. So don't worry about that too much. They should still work out either way. But again, this is the second generation. This is the split lock version, basically just has the two screws that we'd use to lock the head block down to the main shaft, whereas this original version basically just uses the Jesus bolt to hold it in place. So preference would be, if I had to pick between the two, I would definitely take the split lock version. Although I do like the arms of this one better. The Generation 1, I think it looks cooler, but either way. All right, so the way this thing's going to go together is just like, pretty much like the new style feathering shaft. The thrust bearings are going to go in between the two radial bearings. As a matter of fact, here, remember I had mentioned previously with the standard fly barless head that there might be a conical sort of a spacer, and that's what this one is. Let me see if I can get it zoomed up here for you. So see how it's kind of got like a cone shape to it. I don't know if you can see that. And the way this fits on is with the flat part against the head block, and then the more the narrower side will be facing towards the grip. So that's how that's going to go. Then what you're going to have is this smaller radial bearing, and then of course the grip will go on, but I'm going to leave that off for now. And then you're going to have your thrust bearing assembly, again with the larger inner diameter hole facing in, like that. And then the spacer, a little shim here, actually not even a spacer, just a little shim. Then the larger radial bearing, and then from that will be the screw and washer combo. So that's the order that everything's going to go. Again, keeping in mind that your blade grip will actually slip in right between here. But it's the spacer, radial bearing, thrust bearing assembly, a shim, and then your larger radial bearing. So that's how that's going to go. That's going to be the same for both of these heads and both sides. Now, as far as how these arms connect to the blade grip, you basically have this little deal here that's going to slip over and then is going to screw in from the center side. So the screw head, this little screw is going to screw in from the inside. Just like that. So that's how that's going to go. And then of course this is going to fit, I'll show you on this side, like that. So that's how that's going to go. Same thing with this assembly. As far as how the center bearings are all going to come together, you do have several components of this arm that will need to be thread locked down. So this whole piece will come off with 2 screws. This arm will need to be thread locked, that screw in. But that's about it. The DFC heads are pretty simple as far as how they go together. Should be self-explanatory. Of course, the big question is, you know, can you use the standard swash with the DFC heads? And the answer is yes. Basically what you'll end up doing is just using 2 of the balls on the swash as opposed to all 4 of them that you use on the standard fly barless head. But do keep in mind you have a different main shaft. This main shaft is shorter for the DFC than the standard. So hopefully that helps you out. And that's basically all I have to share with you. I think that covers everything I wanted to make sure I was get out. Mostly how these assemblies go together. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on the forums or just, you know, through YouTube comments or messaging through there. So at any rate, that's all I got for now. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.